The wind moaned across the dry plains like an old soul lost between centuries, carrying with it the scent of dust, sagebrush, and something faintly metallic. Blood, maybe, or just the memory of it. The sun had long dropped behind the jagged line of the distant hills, leaving a burnished afterglow that stretched across the sky like an ember fading in a dying fire. The world was quiet now, too quiet for a land that was supposed to be free. Out there, beyond the crooked fence line of Hollow Creek Ranch, a rider came slowly down the ridge. His horse was coated with dust, ribs faintly visible, but it still carried itself proud, as if both man and beast refused to show weakness before the endless horizon. The rider's broad-brimmed hat hid most of his face, but the way he sat in the saddle told a story all its own. A man who'd seen more than his share of hardship, who'd buried his past in the soil just like the bones of his cattle. The small village of Red Hollow slept in the valley below, its lamps flickering weakly in the distance. It wasn't much to look at, just a handful of weather-beaten buildings, the saloon with its faded paint, a small church that leaned slightly to the right, and a few scattered homes. But to the people who lived there, Red Hollow was everything. It was the last breath of civilization before the Badlands swallowed the world whole. The rancher reined in his horse at the ridge's edge, his sharp eyes scanning the valley. Something about the stillness didn't sit right. He could feel it, deep in his bones, the kind of instinct you only earn after years of living under a sky that never forgave mistakes. Then just faintly he heard it, a cry. It was distant, carried by the wind, thin and desperate. He froze, listening. Again it came. "Help! Please!" The voice breaking like glass in the cold air. He didn't think twice. Digging his spurs gently into his horse's side, he rode down the hill fast, the animal's hooves thundering against the dry earth. The sound echoed through the emptiness like gunfire. He followed the cries toward the old riverbed, a place most folks avoided after dark. Rumor had it that outlaws used to dump bodies there back when Red Hollow was still a mining town. Whether or not that was true, the place had a way of making your skin crawl. As he neared the gully, his horse suddenly shied, snorting and stamping the ground. He slowed to a trot, scanning the shadows. The moonlight caught on something pale near the rocks. A hand. He was off the horse in a heartbeat. Lying there in the dirt was a woman, her dress torn, her face streaked with mud and blood. Her wrists were tied, the rope frayed but still cruelly tight. She looked up as he approached, fear and exhaustion clouding her eyes. When she spoke, her voice trembled but carried a strange kind of strength beneath it. "Save me. I swear I'll serve you forever." For a second he just stared. The words hit him like a stone thrown into still water, rippling through something he thought had long gone numb inside him. He cut the rope with his knife, helping her sit up. She was young, maybe mid-20s, with that look of someone who'd been through hell, but wasn't quite ready to surrender to it. Her hands shook as she clutched the side of his coat. "Who did this?" he asked quietly. She hesitated, eyes darting toward the shadows behind him. "Men from Carson's gang," she whispered. "They took my brother. Said they'd come back for me if I ran." He cursed under his breath. Carson's gang had been haunting the countryside for months. Cattle thieves, killers, men who thrived on fear. The sheriff had sent out posses, but they always slipped away into the hills like ghosts. "Can you ride?" he asked. She nodded weakly. He helped her onto his horse and climbed up behind her. As they started back toward his ranch, the wind picked up again, carrying the faint howl of coyotes from the distance. But underneath that, he thought he heard something else. Hoofbeats. Someone was following. He didn't look back right away. He just tightened his arm around her waist and urged the horse faster. The moonlight cast their shadows long across the plain, the shape of two souls running from something dark and close. When they reached the edge of his land, he stopped by the old barn and listened again. The sound was gone. Only the rustle of the dry grass and the creak of the windmill remained. Still, he didn't trust the silence. Not here. Not tonight. Inside the barn, he set her down gently on a pile of hay. She was shivering, though not from the cold. He fetched a blanket from a nearby shelf and handed it to her, his eyes never leaving the door. "You'll stay here tonight," he said. "Safe. Come morning, I'll send word to the sheriff." She looked up at him, her expression full of something he couldn't quite name: fear, gratitude, maybe even disbelief. "Why are you helping me?" she asked softly. He didn't answer right away. Instead, he leaned against one of the wooden beams, staring into the dim light filtering through the cracks in the roof. "Because once," he said finally, his voice rough, "someone saved me when I didn't deserve it either." Her eyes softened, but before she could speak again, a sound outside made them both freeze, a crunch of gravel under boots. Then another. He reached for his rifle. The door creaked open, and the shadow of a man stretched long across the barn floor. "Well, well," a low voice drawled from the darkness. "Ain't this touching? The rancher playing hero again?" The woman gasped, clutching the blanket tighter around her. The rancher didn't move. His finger hovered near the trigger, eyes locked on the figure stepping into the pale light. It was one of Carson's men. He recognized the snake-shaped brand burned into the man's neck. "You picked up something that doesn't belong to you," the outlaw sneered. "Boss says she's got a debt to pay." "She's under my protection now," the rancher said evenly. The outlaw laughed, a cruel, hollow sound. "You can't protect her from what's coming. Carson's riding this way, and he ain't coming alone." The rancher's jaw tightened. He didn't lower the gun. "Then I reckon I'll have to greet him proper," he said. The outlaw's smirk faltered. For a moment, the two men just stared at each other, the tension so thick it could have been cut with a knife. Then the outlaw slowly backed away, still grinning but with a flicker of unease in his eyes. As soon as he was gone, the rancher turned to the woman. "Lock the doors and don't open them for anyone but me." "What are you going to do?" she asked, her voice shaking. He checked the chamber of his rifle, the metallic click echoing through the barn. "Finish something that should have been finished a long time ago." Outside, the wind picked up again, carrying the smell of dust and rain. Thunder rolled faintly in the distance. He stepped out into the dark, hat pulled low, rifle steady in his hand. Behind him, the barn light flickered once, then went out. The night swallowed him whole. And somewhere out there, beyond the ridge, a dozen riders gathered beneath the storm clouds, waiting for him. By sunrise, the town of Red Hollow would never be the same again. The night stretched long and heavy, every sound in the darkness sharp enough to raise the hairs on a man's neck. The rancher stood just outside the barn, his boots sinking slightly into the damp earth as the first drops of rain began to fall. Lightning flashed far across the plains, carving the distant hills into jagged silver shapes. He could see no one yet, but he knew they were out there. He'd felt this kind of waiting before, years ago, when gunsmoke ruled the territories and justice came at the end of a barrel. He turned his gaze back toward the barn for just a moment. Inside, the faint glow of a lantern flickered through the cracks in the wood, and he thought he saw her silhouette move across the light. He didn't even know her name yet, but her voice, the way she'd said, "Save me," still echoed in his mind like a promise he hadn't asked for but couldn't turn away from. He walked slowly toward the corral, rain dripping from the brim of his hat, and checked his rifle again. The weapon was old, same one he'd carried through the border skirmishes a decade ago. He'd sworn off violence after that, built the ranch from the ground up with his own two hands, trying to leave the gunfighter's life behind. But out here, in a land where lawmen came and went like tumbleweeds, peace never lasted long. A distant rumble of thunder rolled across the valley, followed by something sharper. Hooves, faint but growing closer. He moved toward the shadows of the stable and waited, his heart steady, his breathing slow. The wind carried voices, rough, drunken laughter, the kind that belonged to men who had done bad things for too long to remember how to stop. Then the riders appeared, dark shapes against the horizon. 6, maybe 7 of them, with lanterns swaying from their saddles. Their leader rode out front, tall, heavy-shouldered, wearing a duster that flapped behind him like a torn flag. Even from a distance, the rancher knew who it was: Carson. The name alone could make strong men tighten their grip on a rifle. Folks in Red Hollow said he used to be a lawman before he turned sour, before greed and whiskey got the better of him. Now he ran his own brand of justice, taking what he pleased and leaving no one to tell the tale. The rancher crouched low behind the fence, watching as the riders drew near. Carson slowed his horse at the gate, scanning the ranch. He lit a cigar and took a long drag before speaking, his voice rough and lazy, like someone who enjoyed the sound of his own power. "She's here," he said to the men behind him. "Ain't no doubt about it. The little bird don't fly far when her wings are clipped." One of his men chuckled. "You think the rancher will hand her over?" Carson grinned, the ember of his cigar glowing red. "He will, one way or another." Inside the barn, the woman sat near the lantern, her fingers clutching the edges of the blanket so tightly that her knuckles turned white. Every time the thunder cracked, she jumped. She could hear muffled voices outside, and though the words were unclear, the tone was unmistakable. They were here for her. Her mind raced, memories blurring together. Her brother's face when they were taken, the cold laughter of the men, the endless ride through the desert. She'd escaped only because one of them had gotten too drunk to tie a proper knot, but her brother was still out there somewhere, and the thought of him kept her from breaking completely. When the barn door creaked open suddenly, she gasped and shrank back. But it was the rancher, wet from the rain, his eyes dark and unreadable. "They're here," he said quietly. She swallowed hard. "How many?" "Too many for me to count from here." "Carson's leading them." At the mention of the name, she flinched. "He won't stop," she whispered. "He wants something I have." "What?" She hesitated. "A map," he frowned. "A map?" She nodded. "My brother found it near an old mining camp east of the ridge. Said it showed where the army hid a payroll wagon before the war ended. Carson's been after it ever since. He killed half his own men trying to find it. My brother hid the map before they caught us." The rancher let out a slow breath. The old stories about lost army gold had been drifting around these parts for years. Most folks called it campfire talk, but Carson wasn't the kind to chase fairy tales. If he believed it was real, then maybe it was. "You got the map?" he asked. She shook her head. "My brother does, or he did." Outside, one of Carson's men shouted, "Rancher, we know she's in there. Best hand her over before we start lighting fires." The rancher's jaw tightened. He glanced toward the door, then back at her. "Stay down and keep quiet," he said. He stepped outside, rifle in hand, and walked into the open yard. The rain had turned steady now, soaking the dust into mud. The lantern light from the riders cast long shadows across the ground. "I don't recall inviting company," he said evenly. Carson took the cigar from his mouth and flicked it into the mud. "You've got something belongs to me." "She don't belong to anyone," the rancher replied. Carson laughed, but there was no humor in it. "You sound like one of those preacher types." "You a preacher, rancher?" "Not even close." "Good," Carson said, "'cause I'd hate to send a holy man to hell tonight." The rancher didn't blink. He knew the type. Carson loved to talk, to make a show of power, but he also knew talk could turn deadly quick. "I ain't giving her up," he said finally. "You want her, you'll have to come through me." For a moment, silence hung between them, heavy and dangerous. Then Carson smiled again, but his eyes were cold. "Suit yourself." He raised his hand, and his men began to spread out, circling the ranch yard like wolves. The rancher backed toward the barn, every step measured, his rifle ready. Inside, the woman heard the commotion and clutched the lantern close, whispering a prayer under her breath. She'd brought trouble to this man's doorstep, and now he was risking his life because of her. She couldn't sit and do nothing. She looked around the barn, searching for anything she could use. Her eyes landed on an old revolver hanging by the stall door. It was rusted, maybe useless, but it was something. She grabbed it, checked the chamber, and found 2 bullets left. Outside, gunfire cracked through the rain. The rancher fired first, dropping one of Carson's men clean off his horse. The others scattered, shouting, returning fire blindly through the dark. Sparks flew where bullets struck the fence. Lightning lit the scene like a cruel flash of daylight, men, mud, and gun smoke swirling together. The rancher ducked behind a water trough, reloading fast. He'd been in worse fights, but not in a long time. He could feel age in his bones now, the strain in his shoulders with every shot. Still, he kept his aim steady. He wasn't fighting for himself anymore. Then he heard it, a scream from inside the barn. He turned sharply just as 2 riders broke off from the group and headed that way. The woman had been trying to bar the door, but the impact from a boot nearly knocked her backward. She fired once, the sound deafening in the small space. One of the men stumbled, clutching his shoulder, but the other forced his way in. She tried again, but the gun clicked empty. Before the outlaw could reach her, a shot rang out from behind. The rancher stood in the doorway, rifle smoking. The man fell where he stood. "Get to the back," he ordered her. "There's a hatch behind the hay bales. Go!" "But, go!" She obeyed, crawling toward the hidden hatch while he reloaded again. The shooting outside had slowed. replaced by the sound of retreating hooves. Carson's men were pulling back for now, but Carson himself wasn't gone. The rancher stepped outside, scanning the dark. The rain was heavier now, turning the yard into a sea of mud. Then he saw him, Carson still on horseback, his face barely visible under the brim of his hat. "You can't win this," Carson called out. "You're one man. I got a dozen more riding in before sunrise. Then I'll have to make it a long night," the rancher said. Carson laughed and turned his horse. "You're a fool, rancher. She ain't worth dying for. You don't even know who she is." He rode off into the storm, his men following, their lanterns fading into the black. The rancher stood there for a long while, rain dripping from his hat, the silence broken only by thunder. When he finally went back inside, the woman was sitting on the floor, her face pale, her hands trembling. "They're coming back," she whispered. He nodded. "I know." She looked up at him, her voice barely audible. "Why are you helping me?" He didn't answer right away. He looked at her, at the fear in her eyes, and saw something that reminded him of someone long gone, someone he hadn't been able to save. Finally, he said, "Because if I don't, no one will." Outside, the thunder grew louder. The night wasn't over, and somewhere out there, Carson was gathering his men, the storm closing in like a warning. By morning, blood or rain would wash the dust from Red Hollow, but no one could say which it would be. The rain finally broke near dawn, leaving the land quiet and shivering under a low gray sky. The storm had washed away the tracks of the men who'd come in the night, but it hadn't taken the tension with it. The ranch yard was torn up, fences broken, a few boards from the barn splintered where bullets had struck. But the worst of the damage was the feeling that peace had left for good. The rancher stood by the porch steps, coffee tin in one hand, rifle leaning against the railing beside him. His eyes were on the hills. He knew they'd be back. Inside, the woman was asleep, wrapped in a blanket near the fire. She'd been restless most of the night, whispering her brother's name between dreams. When the rancher checked on her, she looked smaller somehow, like the weight of what she'd told him had finally settled in her bones. He poured another cup of coffee and sat at the table, the old clock ticking softly in the corner. He hadn't meant to get involved in any of this. He'd built his life to be quiet, just him, the land, and the sound of the wind. But things had a way of finding him, same as they always did. Maybe it was fate. Maybe it was punishment. He wasn't sure which anymore. By mid-morning, she woke. Her voice was rough when she spoke. "They'll come again, won't they?" "Yes," he said. "Soon as the rain clears." She pulled the blanket tighter around her. "Then you should leave me here. They want me, not you." He shook his head slowly. "Not how it works out here. You're under my roof now, and I don't run from men like Carson." She looked at him for a long time, searching for something in his face. "You fought before," she said quietly. He nodded. "A lifetime ago." She hesitated. "The war." "No," he said. "Something worse. Greed. Men fighting over land that never belonged to them." Silence hung between them for a while. Outside, the wind had died down, leaving the sound of dripping water from the eaves. She finally asked, "What will you do when they come back?" "Whatever I have to." Later that day, the rancher rode into Red Hollow. He needed supplies, ammunition, kerosene, a few tools to fix the fence. But more than that, he needed to talk to someone who still had pull in town. The sheriff, old Ben, was one of the few men left who remembered when law meant something. The town was quiet when he arrived. Most folks were still indoors trying to keep dry. A couple of ranch hands were hitching mules outside the general store, and Mrs. Walker was sweeping rainwater off the boardwalk in front of her boarding house. They nodded politely as he passed, though everyone could see from his face that something was wrong. When he reached the sheriff's office, Ben was sitting behind his desk, boots on the table, reading a newspaper that was 2 days old. He looked up, his gray mustache twitching. "Morning, friend," he said. "Heard you had company out your way last night." "Word travels fast," the rancher replied. "Carson's gang don't move quiet," the sheriff said. "You lucky they didn't burn the place down." The rancher leaned against the doorframe. "They'll be back, and I can't hold them off alone." Ben sighed, setting the paper aside. "You know how it is. I got one deputy who's half blind and the other busy chasing cattle rustlers near Willow Creek. I ain't got men to spare for a fight like that." "Then find them," the rancher said. "If Carson gets what he's after, it won't stop with me." "He's got bigger plans," the sheriff frowned. "What's he after?" "Something buried. Gold, maybe. An army payroll wagon from years back. Ben rubbed his temples. That old story again? Half the men who've gone looking for that fool's treasure wound up dead. Maybe, the rancher said, but this time Carson believes it's real, and he's willing to kill for it. Ben stared at him for a moment, then reached for his hat. I'll see what I can do. But you be careful, you hear? That man's more snake than human. He don't come after people unless he's sure of what he wants. The rancher nodded, then turned to leave. As he stepped back into the street, he caught sight of a boy running toward him. Tommy, one of the kids who worked part-time at the livery stable. He was out of breath, his hair plastered to his forehead. Sir, he gasped. A man came by the ranch, said he's a friend. Been waiting for you. The rancher's stomach dropped. What man? Didn't give a name, the boy said. But he had a mark on his neck. Like a snake, the rancher didn't wait to hear more. He was already running for his horse. Back at the ranch, the clouds were breaking, letting shafts of sunlight fall across the wet grass. The woman was standing near the barn, her hands clutching the old revolver again. When she saw him riding fast up the trail, she looked relieved, until she noticed the look on his face. Who's here? He called out, not slowing his horse. Her eyes flicked toward the house. He said his name's Cole. Said he used to ride with you. The rancher was off his horse in a second, his boots splashing through the puddles. He kicked open the front door. Sitting at his table was a man he hadn't seen in nearly 10 years. Tall, lean, with a rough beard, and the same sharp grin that had gotten him out of and into more trouble than anyone deserved. Cole, the rancher said flatly. You should have stayed gone. Cole raised both hands lazily. Easy now, friend. I didn't come for a fight. You always come for a fight, the rancher said. Cole smirked. Fair point, but not this time. I came to warn you. Carson's gathering men from all across the valley. He means to take your place before sundown tomorrow. Why tell me? Cole shrugged. Let's just say I don't like the way Carson runs things. Too much blood, not enough brains. Besides, you still owe me one. The rancher didn't answer. He didn't trust him. He never had. But Cole wasn't a liar. Not about danger, anyway. You planning to stay? The rancher asked. Depends, Cole said. You still paying whiskey? The woman had been standing quietly in the doorway, listening. She didn't know who this stranger was, but she could feel the tension between the two men like a live wire. You used to ride with Carson? She asked softly. Cole turned toward her, his expression changing. Once, he said. Before I learned what kind of man he really is. She studied him carefully. Then you know what he's after. Cole hesitated. Yeah, he said finally. And you'd best pray he don't find it. That gold ain't just treasure, it's a curse. Men been dying over it since the army buried it. And if your brother's still got that map, he's a walking target. Her breath caught. He's alive? Cole nodded slowly. Last I heard, Carson's keeping him alive. Says the boy'll talk when he's ready. The rancher felt something twist in his chest. He saw the hope flare in her eyes, fragile but fierce. Then we'll get him, he said. She turned to him, startled. How? We go before Carson's men reach the ridge, he said. If your brother's still breathing, he won't be for long once that gold's found. Cole leaned back in his chair. You're outnumbered. You'll be dead before you reach the camp. Maybe, the rancher said. But I ain't sitting here waiting to die. The woman looked between them, torn between fear and faith. She didn't know why she trusted him, this man she'd met only yesterday, but something in his voice made her believe he'd keep his word even if it killed him. By evening, they were readying the horses. The sky had turned a bruised purple, the sun bleeding out behind the hills. Cole loaded extra ammunition, muttering under his breath about fools and their heroics. The rancher checked the saddlebags twice, making sure they had what they needed: rope, lanterns, water, a few supplies. As they prepared to ride out, the woman paused by the barn door. She looked back at the ranch, at the fields glistening under the fading light. If we don't come back, she started to say. He cut her off gently. We will. The wind carried the faint sound of thunder again, distant but growing closer. The air smelled like rain and gunpowder. They rode through the night, following the old wagon trail east. The land grew rougher, rockier, the brush thick and dark. Coyotes cried from the ridges. Cole led the way, his eyes sharp even in the dim light. After a few miles, they stopped to rest near a dry creek bed. The woman climbed down, her legs shaking. The rancher handed her a canteen. Thank you, she murmured. He nodded, watching the horizon. We'll reach Carson's camp by dawn if we keep pace. Cole crouched near the fire, poking at the embers. "If we're lucky," he muttered. The woman looked between them, her voice barely above a whisper. "Do you think he'll kill my brother?" Cole didn't answer right away. He stared into the fire, his jaw tight. "If he don't talk soon," he said finally, "Carson won't need him anymore." The words hit hard. The rancher's grip on his rifle tightened. He knew what needed to be done, but the closer they got, the heavier the air felt. There were too many unknowns, too many ghosts from his past walking beside him now. Somewhere ahead, hidden in the hills, Carson's men were waiting, and the secret that had set all this in motion was buried beneath that same cursed ground. And by the time the sun rose over the ridge, none of them would be the same again. The wind grew colder as they climbed into the hills. The night was black now, moonless, and the stars hid behind heavy clouds. Every sound seemed sharper, the creak of saddle leather, the crack of a twig under a hoof, the faint whistle of wind through the canyon walls. The woman rode behind the rancher, clutching the reins with trembling hands. Her mind replayed the last words her brother had spoken before they were taken. "Don't give it to them, no matter what happens." She hadn't known what he meant then, but now it haunted her with every mile. Cole rode slightly ahead, his rifle resting across his lap. He was quiet more than usual. The rancher knew that meant he was thinking, probably about all the ways this plan could go wrong, and there were plenty. Carson wasn't just a brute. He was clever. He'd pick his ground carefully, set traps, watch from high ridges before making his move. As they neared the edge of the canyon, the rancher raised a hand, signaling for them to stop. They dismounted quietly, tying the horses behind a cluster of rocks. Ahead, faint orange light flickered against the canyon walls, the glow of a campfire. "That's them," Cole said in a low voice. "Carson don't travel light. Probably a dozen men with him, maybe more." The rancher nodded, studying the camp from a distance. He could make out shapes moving near the fire, men laughing, their shadows dancing against the rock. Farther back, near an old fallen tree, 2 guards stood watch, rifles in hand. The woman crouched beside him, trying to see. "Do you think he's there?" "My brother?" He didn't answer right away. "We'll find out soon enough." Cole glanced at him. "You sure about this?" "Once we go in, there's no turning back." The rancher looked at the camp again. "We didn't come this far to turn back." They waited until the fire burned lower and the laughter faded to murmurs. The rancher moved first, silent as a shadow, slipping down the slope toward the camp. Cole followed a few paces behind, watching their flanks. The woman stayed at the ridge, clutching the small pistol he'd given her, heart pounding so hard she could hear it in her ears. Down below, the rancher crept closer, using the rocks for cover. He could smell smoke and whiskey, hear snoring and the rustle of boots against gravel. Then he saw it. Near the center of the camp, tied to a post, was a man. He was slumped forward, hands bound, shirt torn. The firelight flickered across his face, revealing bruises and a gash above his eye. "That's him," the woman whispered from above, her voice breaking. "Her brother." The rancher motioned for Cole to circle left. He waited until one of the guards moved away, then slipped behind the wagons. Every step was careful, measured. He was close enough now to hear the low hum of voices from the other side of the camp. Then, a sound behind him. A rock shifted under a boot. He turned fast, rifle ready, but it was too late. A hand clamped over his mouth and cold steel pressed against his throat. "Thought I smelled trouble," a voice hissed. He elbowed the man hard, breaking free, and slammed the butt of his rifle into his attacker's jaw. The man crumpled, but the noise had already given him away. "Who's there?" someone shouted. Chaos erupted. Men scrambled for their guns, firelight flaring brighter as someone kicked the logs. Cole fired first, dropping a man near the wagons. The rancher took cover behind a boulder and returned fire, bullets whining past his head. The woman, still up on the ridge, froze for a moment, watching the flashes below, then forced herself to act. She aimed carefully at one of the guards, raising his weapon toward the rancher, and fired. The shot echoed across the canyon, and the guard fell backward into the dust. "Move!" Cole yelled. "They'll pin us here!" The rancher darted out from behind the rock, crossing the open ground toward the tied man. Bullets kicked up dirt around his boots, one grazing his sleeve, another splintering the wood post beside the prisoner's head. He reached the man and cut the ropes with his knife. "Can you walk?" he demanded. The man groaned, barely conscious. "You came. Your sister sent me," the rancher said, hauling him to his feet. Behind them, Cole shouted again, "We've got riders coming down from the ridge." The woman saw them first. Dark figures on horseback silhouetted against the lightning that cracked across the sky. More of Carson's men, at least 10 of them. Cole, she called out. They're behind you! He turned, firing up toward the ridge, taking down 2 riders before diving behind a rock. The rest charged forward, shouting. The rancher pulled the prisoner's arm over his shoulder and started back toward the ridge. Cole covered them, reloading fast, but the outlaws were closing in, the air filled with smoke, rain, and gunfire. Then, from the darkness beyond the camp, came a low, slow clap. Carson stepped into the light, his face calm, almost amused. "Well," he said, voice cutting through the noise like a knife. "Didn't figure you for the hero type anymore." The rancher froze. Their eyes met, years of unspoken history passing between them. "You've got no business here, Carson," he said. "Oh, I got plenty of business," Carson replied. "And you just walked right into it." He nodded toward the bound man who now lay barely conscious in the dirt. "That one's got something that belongs to me." "He doesn't have your gold," the rancher said. Carson's grin widened. "No, but his sister does." The woman stiffened on the ridge, realizing too late that he was looking right at her. Before she could duck, 2 of Carson's men turned their rifles upward. She dropped flat, the bullets tearing through the dirt beside her. The rancher fired at them, forcing them to scatter, then turned to Cole. "Get her brother out of here." Cole grabbed the man under the arms and started dragging him toward the creek bed. The woman scrambled down the slope, nearly slipping on the wet rocks, her breath coming in sharp bursts. Carson fired once, the shot whistling past her head. "You can run," he called, "but you can't hide what you've got. That map leads to more gold than you can dream of. You think the army forgot about it? Think again." She stopped, staring at him. "You killed my father for it," she said, her voice trembling but fierce. Carson's smile faltered for the first time. "Your father made a choice. Same one you will." The rancher stepped between them. "That's enough." Carson tilted his head. "Still playing the savior, huh? You never learn. All that land of yours, how long you think you can keep it? Men like me built this country while you played at being righteous." The rancher raised his rifle, eyes cold. "You built nothing. You just take." Before Carson could answer, lightning split the sky again, and in that flash both men moved. 2 shots rang out, so close together they sounded like one. The rancher dove behind a wagon as Carson ducked low, smoke curling from his revolver. The smell of gunpowder filled the air. Cole shouted from the creek, "We have to go. Now!" The rancher fired again, covering their retreat. He didn't know if his bullet hit its mark, but Carson's laughter echoed through the storm, wild and taunting. They scrambled into the ravine, mud splashing beneath their boots. The woman half-carried her brother, whispering his name, trying to keep him awake. Cole led them through the narrow passage between 2 cliffs, his lantern swinging wildly. Behind them, the thunder of hooves grew louder. Carson's men were following. The rancher turned and fired down the passage, dropping 1 rider, but the rest kept coming. The canyon twisted ahead, a maze of rock and shadows. "We can't outrun them," Cole said. "Not like this." "There's an old mine up ahead," the rancher said. "We can lose them in there." They reached the entrance just as the first raindrops began to fall again. The opening yawned like a mouth in the rock, black and cold. They stumbled inside, the echo of pursuit close behind. The air was damp, thick with the smell of earth and rusted iron. The woman lit a small lantern, its weak glow barely cutting through the dark. Her brother collapsed against the wall, gasping. "We need to rest," she said. "He can't keep moving." "We don't have a choice," the rancher said. "Carson's men will find this place before long." Cole kicked at the dirt. "You said this mine was abandoned?" "It was," the rancher said quietly. "Until the cave-in. Whole crew buried somewhere deeper inside." The woman shivered. "Then why—" Before she could finish, a faint sound echoed through the tunnels. Voices. And then, the distinct click of a rifle being cocked. Cole spun toward the entrance, whispering, "They found us." The rancher took a deep breath, checking his rifle again. "Get to the back tunnels, stay low. If they come through here, I'll hold them off." The woman's eyes widened. "You can't fight them alone. I can buy you time." She shook her head, gripping his arm. "Please don't go," he said firmly. "Take your brother. I'll find you when it's done." For a moment their eyes locked, the unspoken truth passing between them. Then Cole grabbed her hand, pulling her toward the deeper tunnels. The rancher turned back toward the entrance, the faint outline of Carson's men moving through the shadows. He could hear their laughter again, cruel and certain. He crouched low, the lantern light flickering behind him, his rifle steady in his hands. The storm outside roared louder, wind howling through the broken timbers like the ghosts of the miners who died there long ago. And then, footsteps. Close now. Carson's voice drifted through the darkness, calm and deadly. You can't hide forever, rancher. The past always finds its way home. The rancher's jaw tightened. He raised his rifle, breath slow and even. The tunnel filled with shadows as Carson stepped into view. And in that frozen heartbeat before the first shot, the storm outside seemed to hold its breath, waiting for what came next. The gunfire started again, echoing through the mine like thunder trapped underground. Dust and splinters of rock fell from the ceiling as the rancher fired, ducked behind a timber beam and fired again. Sparks lit the dark, each flash showing the faces of men who wanted him dead. Carson's voice carried through the chaos, steady, sure, and full of menace. You always had good aim, he shouted, his boots crunching on gravel. But good aim won't stop what's coming. The rancher didn't answer. He knew better than to talk when bullets were flying. He waited, listening for the echo of Carson's voice, then shifted silently to the right, stepping through a shaft of weak lantern light. His pulse was steady. He'd been in worse spots before, but this time it wasn't just his own life on the line. Deeper in the tunnel, Cole led the woman and her brother through narrow, twisting passages. The air grew thicker, the walls damp and cold. The brother stumbled but refused to stop. He's buying us time, Cole said, voice rough. We've got to keep moving. The woman nodded, clutching the lantern tight. Her hands trembled, not from fear alone, but from the weight of everything that had happened. The long years of loss, the secrets buried in the dirt of this land, the man who had chosen to stand between her and death without asking for anything in return. Back near the entrance, Carson moved carefully now, his men spreading out, rifles raised. You can't run from it, rancher, he called again. You and I both know this land wasn't built by saints. You think you're better than me? You're just the same, only slower to admit it. The rancher crouched behind a cart, hearing boots scrape closer. You talk too much, Carson. He fired once. The shot hit true. A man fell with a cry, his rifle clattering to the floor. The others scattered, firing wild into the dark. Carson swore under his breath. Stubborn fool, he muttered, then stepped forward. His own shot rang out, grazing the rancher's shoulder and knocking him back against the rocks. Pain tore through him, but he didn't fall. He gritted his teeth, grabbed the rifle and aimed again. Lightning flashed through the narrow cracks in the mine roof as another storm rolled over the hills above. The rumble of thunder blended with the echo of gunfire until it was impossible to tell where the sky ended and the earth began. Drop the gun, Carson said, stepping into the lantern light. His revolver was raised, his face half shadow. It's over. The rancher stood slowly, his rifle steady despite the blood running down his arm. Maybe for one of us. They stared at each other, two men bound by a past that neither could escape. For a heartbeat, the mine was silent. Then the ground trembled, a beam cracked above them and a shower of dust fell. The cave was giving way. Carson glanced up, eyes widening. You fool, you brought the roof down! The rancher didn't move. You did that the day you started this. He fired. Carson stumbled backward, clutching his side, and fell to his knees. The revolver slipped from his hand, clattering across the rocks. The rancher took a step forward, breathing hard. Carson looked up, his voice weak but still sharp. You think this changes anything? Men like us, we don't get clean endings. The rancher lowered his rifle. Maybe not. But we still get to choose who we stand for. The ceiling groaned again. Rocks tumbled down, and a crack split across the floor between them. The lantern fell and shattered, plunging the tunnel into near darkness. The rancher turned and ran, the rumble growing louder behind him. He could hear Carson coughing somewhere in the dark, but there was no time. The mine was collapsing. He sprinted toward the narrow tunnels where Cole and the others had gone. His shoulder burned, every breath sharp, but he didn't stop. He followed the flicker of their lantern light ahead until he saw them standing near an old shaft that led to the surface. Go! He shouted. Cole climbed first, pulling the brother up with him. The woman hesitated, looking back toward the sound of falling rock. Is he? He's done, the rancher said. Now move. She climbed quickly, the rope rough against her hands. The rancher followed last, the ground trembling beneath his boots. Just as he reached the top, the entrance below caved in completely, sealing the mine with a deafening roar. They stumbled out into the storm. Rain lashed their faces, washing away the dirt and blood. Cole helped the brother to a flat patch of ground under an old tree, where they all collapsed, gasping for air. For a long moment, no one spoke. The wind howled across the plains, and the ranch below was just a faint glow on the horizon. Finally, the woman turned to him. "You came back for us," she said softly. He shook his head. "No, I came because it was right." Her eyes filled with tears that mixed with the rain. "He's gone, isn't he?" The rancher nodded. "The mine took him." She looked down, clutching the small leather pouch at her waist. Inside was the map her father had died for, the one Carson had been willing to kill to get. She pulled it out, staring at it for a long moment before tossing it into the fire Cole had just lit to warm them. The paper curled and blackened, the ink disappearing in seconds. "No one should die for that," she whispered. The rancher watched the flames, his face unreadable. "You did the right thing." By dawn, the storm had passed. The plains stretched wide and golden again, the smell of wet earth rising with the morning sun. They buried what was left of the past there, Carson's greed, the lies, the fear. The woman's brother slept for hours, his wounds not deep enough to claim him but enough to keep him weak for a while. Cole fixed the horses and packed what supplies they had left. "What'll you do now?" he asked the rancher quietly. The rancher shrugged. "Start over, I suppose. There's still fences to mend, cattle to tend. Life don't stop just because a few men lose their way." Cole nodded. "And them?" He looked toward the woman and her brother sitting near the fire. "They'll have a place if they want one." Later that morning, as the sun climbed higher, she walked to where he stood by his horse. "I don't know how to thank you," she said. "You don't have to. I mean it." "If it weren't for you," he stopped her gently. "If it weren't for you, I'd still be the man who kept his head down while the world burned around him. You gave me a reason to stand up again." For a long moment they stood in silence. The wind carried the scent of sage and wet pine. She smiled faintly. "Then maybe we both saved each other." He tipped his hat, a small grin tugging at the corner of his mouth. "Maybe so." They rode back to the valley together, the trail winding between hills washed clean by rain. When they reached the ranch, the land looked different, alive, open, as if the storm had taken more than just the dust and shadows. It had taken the weight that had hung over them all. Weeks passed, and life settled back into something like peace. The woman helped around the ranch, learning the rhythm of the work, while her brother slowly regained his strength. Cole stayed too, fixing the barn roof and rebuilding the fences that had been broken during the fights. Sometimes, in the quiet evenings, they'd all sit on the porch as the sun dipped behind the hills. The woman would hum an old song her mother used to sing, and the rancher would listen, eyes distant but softer than they'd been in years. Every so often, talk would drift back to the mine, to the night the ground gave way and swallowed a man whose name would never be spoken again. But mostly they talked about crops, rain, and the simple work of living. One evening, when the sky turned a deep orange, the woman asked, "Do you ever think about leaving this place?" The rancher looked across the fields, the cattle grazing under the fading light. "Used to," he said. "But some places, once you've fought for them, they become part of you." "You don't walk away from that," she smiled. "Then maybe that's where peace comes from. Not running, but staying." He nodded slowly. "Could be." As night settled, the stars came out clear and bright again, just as they had before everything began. The air was still, the land quiet. Somewhere in the distance a coyote called, and its cry faded into the wide-open dark. The rancher leaned back in his chair, the faint glow of the fire casting light across his worn face. For the first time in a long while he felt something close to peace, not because the world had turned gentle, but because he'd learned to face it, one hard choice at a time. The woman sat beside him, her eyes on the horizon. "You know," she said softly, "when I begged you to save me that night, I didn't think anyone would come." He looked at her, his voice quiet but sure. "Sometimes folks don't need saving. They just need someone to believe they're worth saving." And with that, the night settled around them, calm, honest, and full of promise for whatever came next.